Hello, my name is Lena, and last year I read 100 books. Yes, you heard that right. 100 books. Yes, some of them were children's picture books. I have had feedback that some of them are books like You Choose, which for parents out there you'll know is a work of literature and deserves to be recognised as such. But there are also some really big chunky books on there, just in my defence. For example, I did read Boris Johnson's autobiography, which wasn't my choice, but it was a choice because I got to judge the British Book Awards, and that was one of the books on the shortlist that I was judging. But that was 25 hours long. Like, it's a big boy. He's a small man, the smallest man that ever lived, potentially, but it was a big book. So it's been a real mixture of stuff that I've been reading this year. I've read kids' books, I've read poetry, I've read non-fiction, I've read fiction in various different genres, and I've had such a good time. And something that's great about having read 100 books, which I haven't done, I don't think, since the pandemic, is that I feel like this list of my best books of the year is the best yet. I really feel like it was so hard to narrow it down to 10 to the point where I had to have 2 honourable mentions. And I'm just really excited to talk to you about the books this year because I think they're bloody brilliant. Some of them are completely new. I had some real last minute entries to the list that I can't believe I almost missed. And like all the ones that I read like right at the end of the year. And some of them you will have heard me talk about on the channel before if you've been hanging around, because I've been incredibly evangelical about my love of Wind in the Willows and Anne of Green Gables and stuff like that. So there'll be some recognisable ones on the list as well, but I'm excited to get into it. Before we jump in, do you want to see my Storygraph stats? Storygraph, by the way, is the female-founded, much superior alternative to Goodreads. Goodreads is owned by Jeff Bezos. We don't know what he's doing with your data, but I can tell you that whatever it is, it's not good. So please move over to Storygraph if you can. I have a video about why and how and an interview with the founder up here if you are curious to queue that up after watching this video. My Storygraph stats look like this. As you can see, there is a hilarious little dip in the comparison of books read to pages read at the end of the year, because I really went in hard on my short books at the end of the year. What a ride, but we made it. Most read author of the year was Margaret Atwood. I have challenged myself to read all of her novels. I don't know when I'm going to complete that, because turns out she's written a lot, but I did read 7 this year. And I think that's bloody good going. My biggest reading month was March, in which I read 3,077 pages. Am I well? I am well. I was judging a book award. Okay, that's not normal. That's not normal. We shouldn't aspire for that. I'll probably never do it again, but it was fun. And then finally, my final stat is fiction to non-fiction. Much more fiction this year. I think my ideal reading state is 50% fiction, 50% non-fiction. But this year, for whatever reason, I think because poetry gets classed as fiction in this universe, it really skewed towards fiction. So 69% fiction and 31% non-fiction. Now let's get on with the books, shall we? That's enough chat about stuff. I'm not interested in maths. I'm an English student. First off, will come as no surprise, Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. Maggie O'Farrell, hugely hailed among book lovers and book publishing alike. Everybody freaking loves her. I've seen her speak a few times and I think she's brilliant. And I was given this book during the pandemic. In fact, I had a friend who lived near me who was shielding, and on my little mental health government mandated walk every day, I would go to her house and stand outside for like 5 or 10 minutes and look up at her, because she was living on the first floor of a building, and tell her about my day, listen to her talk about her life, and just give her a little bit of like human contact. And she'd often lower down muffins that she'd made in a plastic bag on a piece of string. One day she lowered this book down in the plastic bag, and I remember just receiving it and being like, this is the book. And I was low-key saving it. I think I was trying to be a bit of a pick-me, and I think that I am quite counter-suggestible when it comes to authors that everybody says that you should read, because I'm like, oh, what if I don't? So I was kind of looking forward to the book and savouring it, and what the podcast Books Unbound would call my mashed potato read. But I think I was also kind of like low-key avoiding it for some really silly self-sabotage reason. But then because of the Women's Prize, I read one of her other books, The Marriage Portrait, and it was freaking brilliant. And then I heard that this film was coming out and Jessie Buckley was going to be playing the main character, and I was like, obviously this is the year, we have to read it. So I did a read along with my Patreons, the Gumption Club. If you're interested in joining our read alongs, you can go below in the description. But we read it together and we all freaking loved it, and I cried a lot and I thought it was brilliant. The premise is that Hamnet with an N, is the name of one of Shakespeare's sons who died, and quite soon after, Shakespeare wrote Hamlet, which is just like an interchangeable Jacobean name for Hamlet. It's kind of like Dave and David. What I love about this is that it brings dignity to stories that have been forgotten and we'll never know. And that is the magic of fiction, is to just give them a little bit of imagination and space to be remembered in a way that they have been forgotten in, and I think that that's beautiful. This really centres Anne Hathaway, or Agnes in the book, who was Shakespeare's wife. In fact, the choice to de-centre men in a book about Shakespeare was a really big feat, and I think she accomplished it brilliantly. We never actually hear William's name in the whole book. He is always referred to as what he is in relation to other people. So he is the tutor at the beginning, because he's a tutor in his hometown of Stratford-upon-Avon. He's referred to as the father, the husband, the son, the glove maker, the playwright. He is only referred to as his function in other people's lives, which, if you think about it, is how everybody in history is referred to in relation to him. So I think that was really beautiful. Without like, it's not disparaging about Shakespeare. It also explores what he went through, but it's really about Agnes, who is very witchy in the book. And this book really came alive for me, not only because I have lived a lot of my life living near the Stratford-upon-Avon where he grew up, so have a lot of memories of going there as a teenager and as a child, so I know the streets that they're talking about when they're talking about them wandering around the town, and it's all set in Stratford-upon-Avon. It's not really set in London, but also because the way it's written is very tactile. You feel everything, you feel really immersed and like you were in that period, in a way that sometimes with historical novels written in the present, you always feel like you're looking in on it. You know what I mean? You don't feel like you're really transported back to that time and you can feel it. You feel like you're looking back, whereas this is really immersive. I feel like I was genuinely living in the 1600s. Because of the way it's written, and also just that brilliant narrative Uno reverse card of it not really being about Shakespeare, but being more about Hamlet, you don't need to know anything about Shakespeare or anything about Hamlet, the play, to enjoy this book. That's a question I get a lot. You don't need that. But what you will need is tissues. In fact, I will tell you, there is one part in the book that isn't in the film that really I will always remember. After they lose Hamnet, which isn't a spoiler, it's literally just all over the blurb and just history. Spoiler for 500 years ago. We don't know much about Hamnet, but we do know that he was a twin and his twin Judith survived. So this is a scene after Hamnet dies. What is the word, Judith asks her mother, for someone who was a twin but is no longer a twin? Her mother, dipping a folded double wick into a heated tallow, pauses but doesn't turn around. If you were a wife, Judith continues, and your husband died, then you're a widow. And if its parents die, a child becomes an orphan. But what is the word for what I am? I don't know, her mother says. Judith watches the liquid slide off the end of the wicks and into the bowl below. Maybe there isn't one, she suggests. Maybe not, says her mother. And the idea that there's no word for what you are when you lose a twin, I actually cannot handle it. We must move on. We must move on. Speaking of grief, it's just something I like to read about a lot, apparently. This is one of the best memoirs I have ever read. And I'm not just talking this year, like ever. Testament to the fact that independent bookshops are the lifeblood of us all, because I wouldn't have picked this up had it not been for the fact that it was Libreria Book of the Year. Libreria is a very cute bookshop in London, you should go. But the cover is kind of and I didn't really get the title, but I just trusted them and I read the blurb and I was like, look, if they say it's good, I'm going to give it a go. And holy hell, when the blurb says that this upends the genre of grief memoir, it's not kidding. And as a connoisseur of grief memoir, for some reason, watch my bookshelf video tour if you're interested in that. I can wholeheartedly agree. This is about a woman who works in book publishing and is best friends with an older gay man who also works in book publishing, and they are just like the platonic love affair of the century. Like, they love each other, they are best of friends, and she gets her apartment broken into and lots of very sentimental stuff gets stolen from her, particularly jewellery, and she grieves the loss of that. 1 month later, her best friend kills himself, and it is about her in denial of that grief and getting completely obsessed with trying to solve the mystery of where her jewellery could be. as a coping mechanism to put off grieving her friend. And that's why it's called Grief is for People, because she realizes that grief is for people, not for objects. If I could ever write one sentence half as good as some of the sentences in this book, I will die happy. I've got 2 examples to read out to you just to give you a taste. Maybe our days are not a mixture of upbeat and downbeat songs, but notes in the same maudlin song. You just haven't hit the bridge yet. Keep humming, you'll get there. And near the end she says, my grief for you will always remain unruly, as I know it contains the logic of everyone who has ever felt it. Sometimes I close my eyes so that I can listen to it spread, so that I can make it spread. I run it up the walls of my apartment. I listen to it circle the door frames and propel itself out of the window. I can hear it clonking down the fire escape, cracking the concrete as it lands. Sometimes I hear it in the rivers, sloshing against stone, or in the subway, screeching to a halt. And then, because I cannot call you home, I call it home. I open my eyes and in a flash it comes back to me, zipping itself into my edges, bobbing between my fingers. It's made a real life for itself here. Oblivious to its own power, it snores so sweetly in my chest, this outline of a woman whose time has not yet come. And she says she needs to learn to be on the side of the living, and it's just, kick you in the guts. Let's talk about something more cheerful. Should we talk about The Wind in the Willows? I read out to you the first page of this book in another video, so I won't bore you again. But please, if you're wondering whether you should read this book, it is in the public domain. So you can go and read the first page, the first chapter, the whole thing for free if you like. But please just go and read the first page online and just to see what I mean when I'm talking about the writing. As somebody who had just come off the back of rereading The Wizard of Oz, and while I love Wicked and I love the idea of Oz, and I love that Frank Baum gave us Oz, it is a bit of a shittily written book, and there's so many books written during this time, which is the turn of the century, where there's a lot of like established norms within literature, but it's also very obvious that like there were less people on Earth, and it was like really hard to get published if you were in any way not privileged. So like the actual books that were being published, not all of them great. This book, my God, it is just about a cozy rat and a toad and a badger and a mole who are platonically in love and just gallivanting about the countryside. But did you know it's also about the struggles of having to watch your friend ruin themselves through addiction? Did you know it also talks about the existential worry of being called by your body to do something you don't want to do, like travel south for the winter, or about how hard it is to know you should probably step out of your comfort zone and try something different and new and scary, but knowing that once you do, you will always grieve that part of you that hadn't done that? No, I didn't think you did. So you obviously haven't read the book yet. Jesus. I read this book because Craig was reading it next to me in bed, and he'd just keep chuckling to himself. And I wanted to know what he was chuckling about. And he was chuckling about one of the best books that was ever written. So there you go. On our children's books kick, I've already told you the story of Anne of Green Gables, but I read Anne of Green Gables because I saw an Instagram reel of somebody who had, as a present for their friend, bought her favourite book and given it to all of her friends, and they'd all read the same copy of the same book and annotated it and highlighted the bits that they liked, and then they gave that friend that book for a present, and it was like all of her best friends had read her favourite book and she cried. And I wanted my friend Ariel to cry at her wedding, so I thought, how do we do that? So me and our other friend Claire decided that we were going to read the same copy of Anne of Green Gables and give it to Ariel the day before her wedding, and she did cry and it was great, and she was so happy. I've got a little clip of it here, but I'm so glad that I read it, because if I hadn't liked it, it would have been really awkward. But turns out it is also one of the best children's books ever read, and if you didn't grow up in North America, it might not have been something like I was aware of Anne of Green Gables, but it wasn't something that was to the forefront of all children's reading. But you can tell that I liked it because obviously I had to give that copy to Ariel. But that wasn't enough for me. I had to buy the next 4 books in 2 volumes because I need to read them all. Somehow it gets you really delightfully invested in the minutiae of this ginger orphan's life living in rural Canada. But it also is very freeing because it's a heroine that is a little bit frivolous, that does care about the fact that she doesn't have puffy sleeves on her dress and everybody else does. It's about a heroine who deliberately does bad stuff and is sometimes really shit at life and admits it, but also just has this talent of bringing out the energy and the vivacity of other people whose lives have slightly, like their souls are slightly dying inside of them. So it's really about found family and beautiful friendships and living rurally and finding the wonder in nature when you have never lived rurally before. So if you haven't read Anne of Green Gables and you want something cozy to start the year off with, my God, have you got an adventure ahead of you. Speaking of classics that I thought I wouldn't like, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This bozo read Treasure Island like maybe 4 years ago because I'd never read it, even though I think I was assigned it at university and I just pretended I'd read it, and I was kind of aware of that, and I was like, should probably go back and read that. So I did, and I didn't enjoy it. That's all I need to say about that. So I thought, Robert Louis Stevenson, he's on my shit list. I will not be reading any more of his books. However, I was in Edinburgh in November and I walked into this amazing independent publisher called John Kay Press, who are on this road that is depicted on the cover. And they had printed this amazing edition of it that was just beautiful, and I have memories of walking up this road when I was a child visiting Edinburgh because a lot of my family lived there, and I just thought, I want to support this beautiful independent publisher / bookshop, and also it's such a beautiful object that even if I don't like it, I think I can make peace with it as like an artifact of a book lover and a souvenir of my trip. However, I ended up reading this book in a freaking day while I was on the trip, because it turns out sometimes the people are right. I am like other girls, and this is one of the most eerie, grubby Victorian masterpieces of humanity's history, and I freaking loved it. I think another thing that people don't really talk about when they talk about this novel is that it's only 88 pages long, and if you already know the premise of the whole Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde thing, I don't think, like, the way that the narrative plays out is still really gripping and such a surprise. So I don't think it's possible to be spoiled for this book in a traditional way. It's gripping enough that you just kind of want to know what happens, and if you just want to read it as like a mystery that you're like, oh, what's going on with this guy, then it's really engaging. But also because there's all these tastes of philosophical questions in it, you can kind of use it to work through your own like thought process about something yourself while you're reading it. For me, I really was thinking a lot about moral purity in the age of the internet and how we try and separate the bad part of ourselves from the good part, and how this book questions if that's possible and the damage it can do if you do try and like over purify yourself without like facing your own demons. But I'm sure it would also just speak to any kind of thinking about purity or like self-hatred and wanting to separate part of yourself from the rest of yourself. I just think we could talk all day, we could talk all year about this book. It's so freaking good. But we must move on. Of course, you'll know I had to include Open Teeth. This is a book about a queer mountain lion who lives under the sign in the Hollywood Hills in LA, which is a thing. Like, there is actually mountain lions living up there, turns out. But this one has existential dread and is pondering the meaning of life. And I don't know if that's real. We'll have to go and ask the lions. He spends his time, when he's not trying to work out how to survive, eavesdropping on hikers and trying to understand the world of humans, and also protecting a homeless encampment that is behind the sign from other hikers that want to abuse the homeless people. There is not one proper paragraph in this whole book. It's told in short, breathless sentences. The blurb says that they're trying to answer the ultimate question: do they want to eat a person or become one? And that kind of weird fascination with humanity where they're like, do I just want it? I don't. It's just so good. I remember there's a line in it where the mountain lion is just thinking and reflecting to themselves, and it's just like, I don't think I can eat everything I'm afraid of. And I was like, oh. There's also this amazing line about a time where they're cowering from a threat, and it says, I retract my claws and try to become the kitten at the centre of myself. This is why we read. This is why we read. Next. The Silent History by Eli Horowitz, Matthew Derby, and Kevin Moffat. Oh my God, this is really bad for my book hoarding tendencies, because often you think to yourself, oh, I've had that book for like 5 years and I haven't read it. I'm probably never going to read it, and it's probably not very good. It's not the book that's meant for me. I'll give it away. This book I owned for 7 years before one day deciding it's time. I should read it. And turns out it's one of the best books I've ever read. So now I'm scared to get rid of any books in my library, because what if it's the next best book I've ever read. This is a book about the silence, a generation of children born without speech, without language, and without communication. They can't tell you their story, but the parents, doctors, inventors, cult leaders, and vigilantes touched by the phenomenon can. So this is a collection of testimonials from all of those other people's perspectives, and essentially how the world is trying to cope with this new type of human who can't do what we expect them to. For something that is told from so many perspectives over so many years, it was incredibly easy to follow, inherently for somebody who struggles reading sci-fi and fantasy, and I'm not very good at following a huge amount of characters or a really complicated storyline. This is just so well executed that it was doable. More authors, please follow suit. But perhaps it was good because it was written by 3 people. And I'm reflecting on how little I read books by more than one person, and how actually we would never expect a music artist to make a perfect Grammy award-winning album on their own. Like, they would have producers, co-writers, people who come in and come out, and you know what I mean? And obviously, like, books get edited, but the fact that there were 3 people, 3 minds driving this book, I wonder if that's why it was so successful when trying to pull off the crazy feat that it pulled off. It's about what happens when the needs of the people we love invite us to change our worldview, and whether we take up that invite. And I'm sure you can think about all the applications of that in the news right now, whether that comes to disability or to trans rights or the needs of refugees. Like, this book is, to me, this book is kind of asking the question, when people need more than society is set up to give, do we ask them to change themselves or force them to change themselves? Or do we change society? And it feels like that whole, it is easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. It feels like a discussion about that to me. But maybe I'm just projecting, and maybe it's just a story about something that could happen. But it made me cry at several points. I think that whatever your type of story, I think there will be something in here that hits for you. And it came out 12 years ago, and I don't think it should be forgotten in the way that I feel like it has been. And that's why we don't just read new releases. What else have we got? Oh yeah, I can't find The Story of a Heart. I've written on this piece of paper to remind myself. My house sometimes swallows books. It's a very hungry house. I don't know where that book has gone, but I've already talked about it several times on the channel, so I'll leave the links below talking about it if you want to hear more of my thoughts about it when I'm actually holding the book. But essentially, it's about the story of a heart, the story of a heart transplant. When a child needs a heart transplant, it's much harder than when an adult needs a heart transplant, because children's hearts are very specific sizes at very specific ages. And you also kind of need a heart that has recently been in somebody else's body. Like, you can't just put it on ice for it's a really delicate organ. So the problem with a child that needs a heart transplant is that really the only way that one set of parents get really good news is when another set of parents get freaking awful, life-changing, worst day of their whole existence news. And the hard dichotomy of that, and how medicine has made that possible, and how we've had this really complicated relationship with doing that. It's kind of like memoir about the families. It basically follows this heart that goes from one child and what happens to them, and the awful accident that they're in, and the hard decision the parents have to make to give that organ away in the worst moments of their life, do something that's going to change somebody else's life. And then it also tracks the logistics. Like, if you're just like a nerd and like you just want to get immersed in a kind of podcast style deep dive into the logistics of how you would get a human heart across the country, it involves beer coolers and helicopters is all I'll say. How you would physically get a heart to another person's body in the amount of time before the heart stops working. An amazing feat of geeky detail, and also a little bit of like socio-political history about how we used to, like, we had this technology to give organ transplants way before we started using it, but because of the influence of the church and religion and superstition, we weren't feeling very confident about the moral implications of taking a heart that we've impressed all of this big meaning onto, like symbolically, taking a heart from one body to another. We just, as a society, we couldn't work out whether that was actually okay. So we delayed it for a really long time, even though we could have been doing it for a lot longer. It's such a clever mix of respectful, hearty biography about these families, well researched. The woman who wrote it is a doctor and is very passionate about the role of the NHS and how we shouldn't defund it, but also like a really interesting look more existentially about how we think about our bodies and how we share bodies together, and how like we aren't just individuals, we are kind of connected. I actually, honestly, I have a book called Half-Assed Human that I should probably plug more. Sorry, publishers. Half-Assed Human is just come out in paperback, How to Live Better Without Burning Out. And I really enjoyed writing non-fiction, but I'm working on writing more fiction and I love that. And I don't know, like before reading The Story of the Heart, I was like, I'm probably never going to write non-fiction again. Like I enjoyed doing it, but I'd really like to write some fiction. And then after I read Story of the Heart, I was like, damn it, I would love to write something half as good as The Story of the Heart. And I do love, like my heart is with non-fiction. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is it had that much of an impact on me that it actually changed the way I think about my own creative trajectory. There's simply never going to be enough time in one video to tell you how good all these books are, but it's killing me that I don't just spend an hour talking about each one. In Love with Love by Ella Rishbriger. If you've been a fan of this channel for a while, I don't know why am I talking to the book? If you've been a fan of this channel for a while, you'll know that I love Ella Rishbriger's writing. She wrote Midnight Chicken. Oh, she collected my favourite poetry anthology. I just think she is one to watch. So when I heard that she was bringing out a collection of essays in defense of romance novels, I lost my mind. I love the excerpt from the book that they've printed on the back. This book is for everyone who cares too much, everyone who has ever cried at the third act crisis, or got breathless at a fictional touch on a fictional cheek, or tilted their screen away from a stranger on the tube. This is a book for everyone blushing on the bus. If you don't really read or care about romance fiction, I actually think you should read this. I actually think you will enjoy it if you are a fan of romance fiction, but I also think you would really enjoy it if you're not, because it's not only about romance fiction and challenging your perceptions around it, even if you never plan to actually read romance fiction, but it also, in a really clever, warm way, asks questions like, what is genre? What is preference? What is the role of romance in capitalism, and how do we deal with that? What is play, and who gets to play, and who gets to say what play is? I think I could sell you on this book, honestly, just by reading out the titles of the chapters. Are you ready? Chapter 1, What If We Kissed in the Community Library? Chapter 2, A Truth Universally Acknowledged. Chapter 3, The Hot Billionaires Are Back. Chapter 4, The Fox, the Hedgehog and the Aliens. Chapter 5, Cowboys and Horses. Chapter 6, Daisy Bacon and the 50/50 Girls. Chapter 7, The Hometown Hero. Chapter 8, Sex and Text. Chapter 9, 2 Tickets for the Love Train. Chapter 10, Gay Boys, Straight Girls and Queer Awakenings. And Chapter 11, The Infinite Weird. And then the epilogue is called What If We Kissed at the Funeral Home? As somebody who has enjoyed occasionally some romance fiction, but isn't like a big purporter or defender of it, I really noticed a change in my own genuine attitude after reading this book, in that I saw everybody talking about the kind of spicy romance book called Heated Rivalry about hockey players. And while I haven't read it yet, let me know in the comments if you think I should, I really think I would have internally, honestly, had a little bit of an eye roll about it. It was because of this book that instead my instinct was to go, good for them. I hope they're having fun. That sounds cute. Amazing news that so many people are having a good time. And then something very unusual happened. The final book that I read in 2025 made it to the list. I listened to the audiobook of Don't Burn Anyone at the Stake Today by Naomi Alderman, who is the author of The Power. If you recognise the name, that's probably why. I listened to the audiobook while I was sewing on New Year's Eve. And it was literally like minutes to midnight, and it was my 100th book, and I cried at the sewing machine. Like I actually couldn't handle it. It is a very short audiobook. I think it's about 2.5 or 3 hours. The subtitle is And Other Lessons from History About Living Through an Information Crisis. And I don't know about you, but I live here. The internet is one of the places that I have always lived. And actually, I have a great time here. It's not my whole life, but I have a great time here. I've learned a lot. I've met people. I've opened my perspectives. I feel like the loving and generous things that people have left for free on the internet have genuinely shaped the person that I am. And I quite like who I am. And I actually am scared of who I wouldn't have been without those generous people sharing that stuff on the internet. So when people talk about information crises and AI and the idea that the internet is dying and dead internet theory, it makes me sad on like so many levels. And I don't think I realized how sad I was about it until I got a reassuring kind of like off-duty, loving English lecturer vibe pep talk from Naomi Alderman via the audiobook. Not only does she talk about this idea like that information crises have always happened and we've always had to adapt around them, and the best thing we can do is know that we're in one and act accordingly. But she talks about like the beginning of the written word and how that really changed everything. We went from collective memory to individual perspectives and accounts and who was allowed to write down those accounts. And we also kind of disposed of our elders as really valuable people because we could like pass down information without them essentially now. And what I loved most about this book was not only it was beautiful and it made me feel very encouraged and galvanized to work out how to solve it for myself, but it also gives really practical advice on things you can do collectively and as an individual to protect yourself from the information crisis, try and navigate your way around it and do good during it. And for that reason, it has actually gone on my read-along list for 2026. I run read-alongs on my Gumption Club Discord, which is part of my Patreon, and I'm always trying to find books that I think that they will love, that we will have really interesting discussions about on Discord, and we also do like a live call where we talk about the book as well. So this has instantly gone on my list for books that the Gumption Club will be reading together in 2026. So if you're interested in reading along with me and lots of other people, I'll leave the links on how to do that below. In my honourable mentions, because that was 10, that's all I get, but in my honourable mentions there's another one we'll be reading, which is Jews Don't Count by David Baddiel. I don't have the book physically at the moment, but I will. But I also listened to the audiobook of this as like my second to last book of 2026, I believe. This is a book that my friend Hannah really loved, and learning more about her Jewish identity as she's like one of my best friends has been really interesting, and she's always said this book's really good. She interviewed the author on her channel, and I've always meant to read it, and I thought actually that now's the time. I would like to do that. It was such a useful perspective from a Jewish man who is in the public eye, who has received a lot of anti-Semitic abuse. What was useful about it is that he really like drills down the premise of the book, and he's like, here's what I'm addressing. I'm not addressing all anti-Semitism. I'm not addressing like the history of Jewish identity in the world. I am specifically addressing anti-Semitism in leftist spaces in Britain. I feel like parts of it I knew, but I didn't understand. Like he really gave examples and drilled it down. I just thought that it was really thoughtful, and that his kind of manifesto is that what he feels like he's hearing from the left is that Jews don't count. That anti-Semitism isn't real racism, and it's not like a real kind of prejudice that we need to worry about in the same way that we worry and believe people about other kinds of prejudice on the left. And even like the incessant way he is asked about Israel is inherently problematic in itself. And I just thought that I don't know, I just think it was a really great execution of a really hard topic. And we're also going to be reading that for the Gumption Club read-alongs this year, because I think it's something that definitely needs to be discussed more. And then also one that almost made the list was When the Museum is Closed by Emi Yagi and translated by Yuki Tajima. This is a book that I picked up in a bookshop in Manchester that you all told me to go to, and I freaking love the bookshop, and I had to leave for something. If you know anything about me, I love a premise where people fall in love with inanimate objects. I don't know what it is, I just love a weird premise like that. And this is about a woman who is called Rika, and she learned Latin at university, and it's very rare anywhere, but particularly in Japan, for somebody to randomly learn Latin when they're not going to use it in their everyday life. And she actually works in a meat packing factory, in a meat freeze packing factory, I think, but she just happens to know Latin. So she gets hired by the museum on the day that the museum is closed to go and keep the statue of Venus company, because the statue of Venus in this museum is alive, and she has a lot to say, and she gets very bored, and she needs somebody to talk to, but she only speaks Latin. So it's about basically them slowly, like her falling in love with the statue. I don't really even know what the themes of this book are. There's so many, I can't even name them, but it was just like a really sweet, nice read, and a nice bit of joyful queer literature. It's a very self-contained, sweet little story. So yes, would definitely recommend that one. Thank you so much for watching and spending some cozy time with me this January. Let me know what the best book you read in 2026 was, because obviously I'm always looking for book recommendations from you lot. This is my book. It's called Half Fast Human. If you'd like to get it, it's now available in paperback. It might be available in your country, at least if you're not in the UK. It will be available from Blackwell's. I'll leave the links below. So you can get it anywhere in the world with free shipping. And it's also available in audio. If you are looking to read more this year and think more deeply about ways that you can like act on what you're reading, especially when it comes to nonfiction, would love to see you in the Gumption Club. That is my Patreon group. We have very active Discord where we talk about everything that we're reading, but particularly with the read-alongs this year, I think we're going to have a really fun time. So if you enjoy this channel and you like my vibe, there are lots of other people like me, funnier, more intelligent, better than me, all sitting in the Discord waiting to chat to you about books. So if you are interested in joining, I will leave the links to those below. If you miss book content on this channel, I don't do it as often as I used to, but I do often talk about the books that I'm reading on Instagram. So if you haven't followed me over there and you'd like sneak peeks of what will eventually turn up in videos like this, then I recommend that you follow me on there. Thank you so much for watching. Frog Snug out.